Welcome to the Math Review. This lesson is on subtracting decimals from whole numbers. And here we have 3 examples. But before we do any of these examples, we need to make sure that we're familiar with the rules for subtracting decimals from whole numbers. Now, this is probably one of the trickier lessons when it comes to subtracting with decimals, and the reason why is when it comes to whole numbers, there's a lot of borrowing, or also called regrouping, involved. So let's go through each of the rules. So number 1 says to make sure we use a decimal point to line up our place values. Very important. You need to make sure that you have one number on top of the other number. If you have 2 digits in one column, that's a sign that you might have done something wrong. Number 2 is to make sure you annex zeros. And annex might be fancy math lingo, but it just means to use zeros as placeholders before you start subtracting. Once you've done step 1 and step 2, then you can go to step 3, which is actually start subtracting column by column, starting from the right. Oh, one other thing, and this is a really important note, so please make sure you pay close attention. All whole numbers have a decimal point to the right. Here's what I mean. In this first example, we have the whole number 35. Now, it might not look like there's a decimal point there, but there actually is one directly to the right of the number. So we could put a decimal point right here in the number 35. In our second example, we have the whole number 44. Where do you think the decimal point is going to be? Is it here? Nope, not here. That would be 0.44. How about here? Nope, that would be 4.4. But to be just a plain number 44, we would have to have a decimal point to the right of the whole number. So it would be right here. And how about in this third example? 99 minus 31.008, or 31 and 8 thousandths. Well, the decimal point is, again, according to our note, it's to the right. So we can put the decimal point right here. Now that alone, that one important note, makes all of this a lot easier. So now let's go back to question number 1. Let's rewrite it so that we have everything one on top of the other, with 35 on top. Now remember, we have a decimal point located to the right of the 5, so let's put that here as well. And now we're going to put minus 4.2, or 4 2/10. But remember that the decimal point has to be used to line up our place values. So let's make sure that we have a decimal point here. And now we can put the 4 right next to the decimal point on the left. And I'll put the 2 to the right. Now that we've used our decimal point to line everything up, as it says in step number 1, now we can go to step 2, which is to annex any zeros that we need. In other words, wherever you see a blank place value, like right here, we can put a 0 there instead. So I'll put a 0 here, right above the 2. And then we can subtract. And remember, we have to go column by column starting from the right, like it says in step number 3. But we can't do 0 minus 2. So we're going to have to borrow from this column here. So this 5 is going to become a 4, and this 0 becomes a 10. So 10 minus 2 is 8. I'll bring a decimal point down underneath the other decimal points. I've got 4 minus 4 is just 0. I'll put a 0 here. And then I've got 3 minus nothing, which is 3. So our final answer is 30.8. But what we could say is the difference, because it's subtraction, the difference of 35 and 4 2/10 is 30 8/10. Let's take a look at example 2. So question 2 says 44 minus 18.21, or 18 21/100. Remember, like we said before in the note, all whole numbers have a decimal point to the right, and that's why we put a decimal point here. So now let's write 44. And I'm also going to make sure that I put that decimal point there. So let's take a look at step 1. We've got to make sure we use a decimal point to line up our place values. In 18.21, I'll put the decimal point first. And then I'll make sure I put the 18 on the left side of the decimal point, but making sure that the numbers are lined up in the proper columns. So I'll put an 8 here and a 1 here. And then here I'll put 21 to the right of the decimal point. 21. So now let's go to step 2. Now we can annex zeros, which means we can just put zeros as placeholders in this whole number here. So I'll annex 1 0 here on top of the 2 in the tens place. And then I'll annex another 0 here on top of the 1 in the hundreds place. Then I'll put my subtraction sign and a line under everything. Now this one's a little bit tricky because we've got to do a double borrow or a double regroup. So the issue here is I need to make this 0 a 10, but this place value here is a 0, so I can't borrow anything from here. So the first thing that has to happen is this 0 has to not be a 0. So I'm going to make this 0 here a 10, which means this 4 will become a 3. And now I can borrow from this 10 here, but this 10 will now become a 9. And this 0 here will become a 10. So now we've got 10 minus 1, which is 9. 9 minus 2, which is 7. I'll bring down my decimal point directly under the other decimal points. And then I'm going to this column here. But here, now I've got 3 minus 8, which that's a no can do. We're going to have to borrow from this 4, which means this 4 here will become a 3. And this 3 here will become a 13. And 13 minus 8 is 5. So I'll put a 5 in that column. And now I've got 3 minus 1, which is 2. So our final answer here is 25.79, or 25 79/100ths. Let's take a look at our last example. This one is a doozy, so make sure that you're following along very carefully. So example 3 says 99 minus 31.008, or 31 and 8 thousandths. So let's start with step 1, which is to use the decimal point to line up our place values. The first thing I'll have to do is take the number 99 and write it down. And again, remember, like we said in the note, all whole numbers have a decimal point located to the right. So we'll put that decimal point as well. Next, we're going to use the decimal point in 31.008 to make sure that everything is lined up for our subtraction. So I'll put a decimal point here. I'll put a 31 to the left, making sure that each number is in its proper column. So I've got a 1 here and a 3 here. That gives us 31. And to the right of the decimal, we've got a 008. And that's not too bad because there's nothing here, so we don't have to worry about it being in the right column. So let's just write 008. Now we'll go to step 2, which is to annex zeros. And we're going to need a lot of zeros here because right next to 99, we do have a decimal point, but that means we have 3 place values blank. So we're going to have to annex a 0 in every one of these columns. So I'll put a 0 above this 0, I'll put a 0 above this 0, and a 0 above this 8. Then I'll put a subtraction sign and a line under everything. Now we'll go to step 3, which is to subtract each column starting from the right. This is where it's really tricky. I can't subtract 0 minus 8, so I would try to borrow from here. But the problem is that there's nothing to borrow from. So I might try to go here. But the problem is there's nothing to borrow from here either. So I'm going to have to go here. And this 9 is going to have to become an 8. Which means this 0 will become a 10. Now bear with me, there's a lot of work here. So now I can borrow from this 10, which will become a 9. Which means now this 0 will become a 10. But now this 10 I can borrow from for this 0, and this 10 will become a 9 also. And that means that this 0 here can finally become a 10. So now I've got 10 minus 8, which is going to give us 2. I've got 9 minus 0, which is 9. 9 minus 0 again in this column, which again is 9. I'll put a decimal point directly under the other decimal points. I've got 8 minus 1, which is 7. And here I've got 9 minus 3, which is 6. So we could say that 99 minus 31 and 8 thousandths equals 67 and 992 thousandths. Thanks for watching our video on the math review. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. We might use your question in our next video. And if you found this lesson helpful, please make sure you like and subscribe to our channel. And it would really help if you share this and our other videos to any of your social media platforms. See you next time on the Math Review.